Hey guys, Mr. P. In this video, we're going to talk about water and all of the physical properties that give water a unique ability to do a lot of incredible things for not only humans, but all life on the planet. So the water molecule, as we talked about in the last video, is made of oxygen and hydrogen. And we also talked about in the last video how water molecules are covalently bound between the oxygen and the hydrogens. The hydrogens, remember, had a single electron of their own, and the oxygen had 6 valence electrons of its own and needed to share a total of 2 with the oxygen molecules. And so it therefore creates 2 covalent bonds between every oxygen atom and the 2 hydrogen atoms. But diving in a little deeper, you'll notice that the oxygen nucleus is substantially larger than the hydrogen nuclei, and this larger mass is going to create larger pull on the shared electrons. And so because it's bigger and it has a stronger pull, these electrons are going to spend more time around the oxygen nucleus than they are around the hydrogen nucleus. And so if you even just look at the distribution of the electrons in this particular diagram, you'll notice that the majority of the electrons are around the oxygen nucleus, but they're also up here on this end, meaning there are 4 electrons on that end or that pole of this particular molecule. And you'll notice that there are very few, and in this particular instance there are 0 electrons down here on this end. The farthest charge on this pole or this end of the molecule is a positive. So when you look at the net charges of the particular water molecule, you'll notice that the oxygen side of the water molecule has a partial negative. A partial negative charge, and the pole on the hydrogen side is a partial positive charge. That is critical in the formation of the properties that all water molecules have, and therefore the physical properties of water as a medium. And the fact that oxygen has a slightly negative side and hydrogen has a slightly positive side means that water molecules are polar. Okay, they have a positive pole and a negative pole. They have a partially positive side and a partially negative side. Water is a polar molecule. What does polarity mean? Polarity means that our water molecules can form hydrogen bonds. In the last video, I talked about hydrogen bonds, but we didn't really talk about them in specific terms. And that's because the purpose of that video was just getting kind of an introduction into the nature of matter. And now we're going to kind of talk about why water is the way that it is and what allows water to act the way that it does. So water is a polar molecule. Polar molecules have a partially positive and a partially negative side, and polar molecules in this case have the ability to form these hydrogen bonds between them. So all of the partially positive hydrogens among all of the water molecules within a particular sample can form and do form these hydrogen bonds between the partially negative oxygens and the partially positive hydrogens of each of the molecules. So you'll notice that this oxygen with its partial negative is going to form the hydrogen bond with the partial positive of the adjacent hydrogen. This hydrogen and its partial positive charge is going to form a hydrogen bond with the partial negative charge of the adjacent molecule. Each of these hydrogen bonds form this lattice structure that allows all of these water molecules to stick together and produce a variety of features that give water unique abilities to do some incredible things. And some of these special properties of water include cohesion. Cohesion is a term that refers to water molecules sticking to water. So the fact that water molecules can stick to other water molecules means that water forms liquid water because the water molecules are specifically sticking together to form enough mass that is liquid water. They also form beads so that water again sticks to water. Adhesion, which is water sticking to non-water things. So when water sticks to non-water substances, that would be adhesion. In this case, the beads of water sticking to the leaf blades. You have other properties like water in living things, meaning all living things are composed of water. Water is the medium of life, and another one of the things in terms of human example would be blood. Water is the solvent in blood that all of the blood components are dissolved in. And water has a really high specific heat capacity. Water, or liquid water, on our planet is subjected to huge amounts of physical energy in the form of ultraviolet and visible light radiation. And all of this heat and all of this energy is constantly being sent from the sun to the water, and water withstands a temperature change. It's really important for marine life and aquatic life to live in an environment that is stable. Specific heat capacity leads to stability in our aqueous temperatures on the planet, which obviously marine life needs to have. So when we focus on these in depth, cohesion is water molecules sticking to water molecules. So as the last slide suggested, water has the ability to form beads. These beads are formed because all of the water molecules are creating these hydrogen bonds between the positive side of the hydrogen and the negative side of the oxygen, and it's holding all of these water molecules together in this bead, which can obviously form liquid water in larger masses when there are more water molecules to pull from. Cohesion also creates a specific property of water known as surface tension. So surface tension is when all of these water molecules are sticking together. It actually creates kind of like a solid lattice that lighter organisms like insects can actually walk on, and these interactions are so strong that it forms this kind of cohesive surface tension that supports the weight of some of these lighter specimens. If we dive into adhesion, adhesion is related specifically to capillary action. So the adhesion between water molecules and glass molecules is stronger than the water molecules sticking to themselves. So in this case, the adhesive forces of the water sticking to the sides of the glass container are stronger than the water sticking to water, and it's actually stronger than gravity pulling on these water molecules. And so you'll actually see that the water in these graduated cylinders is bent. We call that the meniscus, and it's actually formed because of the interaction, the strong interaction or the strong adhesive forces of the water molecules being pulled up the sides of the glass, because there is an interaction between the positive side of the waters and the negative side, the net negative charge of the glass. Capillary action can also be seen when you decrease the diameter of the glass tube. So if we decrease the diameter, meaning the physical diameter of the tube, you'll notice gets shorter and shorter and shorter as we go to the right of this apparatus. The height at which the liquid is pulled up the tubes continually increases as the diameter decreases. So there is an inverse relationship between diameter of vessel and the amount of water that can be moved up the tube. This is called capillary action, and it's the way that plants will utilize small inside vascular tissue diameters in order to pull large amounts of water up their stem without any kind of muscular contraction. Again, it's just adhesive forces, water molecules sticking to the sides of the glass and being pulled up against gravity. Special properties of water, the heat capacity is, like I said in that previous slide, there is a substantial amount of energy that is being emitted from the sun. This heat energy is going to be used by different media on the planet in different ways. If we were to look specifically at sand and water as a comparison, sand has a low specific heat capacity, which means all of the energy that is being sent from the sun is going to cause the sand to have a large temperature rise. You can notice that if you've ever been to the beach. The sand right at the shore of the beach, right where the water and the sand meet, is incredibly hot, but the water is incredibly cold in some situations, or is warm but not as hot as the sand. Sand does not have the ability to withstand all of that energy being sent to it, so it increases in temp substantially, whereas water, which is right next to the sand, is receiving the same amount of energy from the sun that the sand is receiving, but it only has a very small temperature change because it has the high specific heat capacity. And if you look at this chart, you'll notice that there are some common materials on this chart, but liquid water has an incredibly high specific heat capacity in relation to a lot of these other things. If you were to emit energy to some of these metals like iron, copper, and lead, they would heat up way hotter in a decreased amount of time compared to water. Water takes a substantial amount of heat and withstands a temperature change because it has the ability to break those hydrogen bonds and therefore dissipate the heat before it actually has to warm up. Water in living things is water as a solvent. So water accounts for approximately 60% of the mass of the human body. So 60% of the weight of you approximately is all water. Water is incredibly important because chemical reactions that take place within the cells and living organisms do so in a water environment. Water is what we call the universal solvent. which means it has the ability to dissolve a lot of things in it. And organisms are no different. We are water-based organisms, and we use things like enzymes dissolved in water to not only break down large components into the basic building blocks, but we also use water to build up larger components from the smaller building blocks. Nearly everything that cells do, from growth and development to movement, takes place by means of chemical reactions in water. Later in the class, we're going to get more in depth into some of these chemical equations, dehydration, synthesis, hydrolysis, stuff like that. But for now, as long as you know that water is the universal solvent and water is vital in the chemical composition of living things, you're on your way to total comprehension. So what is the difference between solutions and suspensions? Solutions are when you have things that are dissolved in a solvent and they are kind of homogeneous and they are dissolved and completely disappear. Suspensions is when you have substances that are maybe just kind of free floating in your solution. But a mixture is a material composed of two or more elements or compounds that are physically mixed together but not chemically combined. An example of a mixture would be our atmosphere. In our atmosphere, we have nitrogen gas, we have oxygen gas, we have carbon dioxide, and we have a bunch of other gases that make up kind of that minutia of the other gas category. That would be a mixture because the oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen are not chemically combined. All of the components of a solution are evenly distributed throughout that solution, and an example of that would be you have a solvent, in this case water. Water molecules would be our solvent. And if we were to dissolve salt, which is NaCl, into our water, water being the solvent, it would create our solute, which salt, NaCl, would dissipate or deionize or would dissolve into the individual ions. You'd have your negative chlorine ions and you'd have your positive sodium ions, and the water, based on polarity, meaning the positive side of our hydrogens would hold on to our negative ion because opposites attract. The negative ion would form those bonds with the positive hydrogens, and the water molecules would physically flip around when they are trying to dissolve the positive ions because they would then need to interact with the negative side of our water. Because water is a polar solvent, it can dissolve polar substances by interacting on a specific side with whatever charge it needed to interact with. Water can dissolve both ionic compounds and other polar molecules because of the fact that water is polar. That's it for this lecture. If you learned something, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. See ya.